to start? Oh. All right. Good morning, everybody. We're going to roll into it here. Today, we're going to discuss some guidelines for writing a narrative. I'm Joe Kinsman, a planner with the land use program at the county.
And I'm Michelle Dawson. I'm an engineer with the development engineering program at the county.
All right. Our first slide here is narrative requirements. The minimum narrative requirements are from Table 40.510.050-1 in the application submittal requirements for Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3 reviews. Under number 6, the narrative, a written narrative shall be submitted that addresses the following. A, how the application meets or exceeds each of the applicable approval criteria and standards, and B, how the issues identified in the pre-application conference have been addressed, and generally, how services will be provided to the site. On the next slide, we will discuss some general information related to these two requirements. So the general idea, the narrative is required for all land use applications, type 1, 2, and 3, including pre-applications. The more thorough your narrative is, the more accurate staff feedback will be and will result in less need for multiple back and forth revisions. The applicable approval criteria is the criteria that the project will be compared to for approval or the need for more information. It is the applicant's responsibility to demonstrate that they comply with the applicable code criteria and to argue if a relevant code section is not applicable to the specific project and why. On the next slide, we go over some basic information your narrative needs to include. The basic information. The narrative needs to include basic information about the proposal and the approval criteria that are relevant to the project. Here is a list of some of the basic information that may be applicable to your project and should be discussed within your narrative. 1, the project name, the site location, zoning, parcel size, and other site-specific information. The project description, such as the proposed and existing use, density, size of the lots being created or size of the building, parking, solid waste, access to the site, environmental sensitive areas, landscaping and screening, stormwater, lighting, noise, and services to the site. If it's a phased project, then phasing will need to be included. The structure or structures or any structural changes. And then if it's a business, hours of operation and capacity for a storage facility or students in a school, etc. The narrative also needs to address all irrelevant code sections, also referred to as approval criteria. If the project had a pre-application conference, then relevant code sections and major issues identified by staff will be in the final pre-application report. That report is your guide to areas that will specifically need to be addressed by your narrative and application packet. On the next couple of slides, we will discuss the different review types and how this can impact your narrative.
The county has different review types ranging from type 1 to type 3, with the former generally being the least intensive. The type of review you trigger will generally reflect the complexity of the project or the complexity of the site on which the project is located. For a type 1 review or any review, the best source for requirements is going to be the county provided handouts. These handouts outline the general submittal items required for review. As you can see on this slide, taken from the variance handout, it specifically lists the items that should be addressed within your narrative by review type. The type of review your project triggers will be dependent on your proposal. Here are some examples. Some examples of a Type 1 case may be certain home businesses, a lot determination, or a Type 1 site plan. Some examples of a Type 2 case may be a short plat between 2 to 9 lots within the urban zones and between 2 to 4 lots within the rural zones, as well as projects triggering a Type 2 site plan such as commercial or industrial developments. Some examples of a Type 3 case are subdivisions of 10 or more lots within the urban zones and of 5 or more lots within the rural zones. Conditional use permits can also trigger a Type 3 review at times. These are triggered by uses that are not outright allowed within a certain zoning designation, such as an elementary school in an industrial zone or a church within the urban zoning designations. A lot of projects may seem simple, but may have complex approval criteria, and you may need professionals to help with the preparation of your application packet as well as your narrative. On the next couple of slides, we will discuss some general guidelines for preparing your narrative. The narrative we are asking for is not a story, but factual statements addressing each applicable code section to the proposed development. These statements should be concise and to the point. If the narrative discusses one thing and your supporting documentation, such as the plan, shows something else, this inconsistency slows down the review process and results in additional corrections and communication with staff that costs review time and causes delays. Every time an item is requested and submitted to the review staff, it could add up to 14 days to your review timeline for each occurrence. If the narrative references other documents in the application packet, this should include the document title, page number, etc., so that the supporting documentation can easily be found. If the applicant believes a major issue or code section identified in the pre-application is not applicable, the applicant's narrative needs to explain or justify why it is not applicable. Even if it appears to be obvious to the applicant, simply stating that something is not applicable is not sufficient. When referring to code sections, they only need to be referenced by name and title. Including the entire language of the code section results in a bulky narrative with repetitive language that is not necessary. Here we have an example narrative. The author of this narrative used their own organizational structure and references each code section by number and title. The narrative then provides context and additional references as to why a code section is or is not applicable to the project or how the project meets the code. On the next couple of slides, we will discuss the pre-application report and the major issues identified by county staff in that report.
Major issues. When a pre-application conference is required, the major issues as identified in your pre-application report are issues or concerns related to the applicable code requirements that staff identified as being of particular concern with the plan and narrative provided during the pre-app. These major issues need to be specifically identified and discussed in your narrative, and the location where compliance is demonstrated should be identified as well. As you can see on the screen here, the applicable regulations section within the pre-app report will have a list of relevant code sections that need to be addressed in your narrative. Here we have an example that includes the transportation major issues and the applicant's response. In the applicant's response, they state how they are meeting the major issue identified in the pre-application report and where additional information can be found within the pre-applicant's or within the applicant's submittal packet. On the next several slides, we will go over in more detail the expectations and some guidance for your narrative. The expectation of facts. Creating a narrative with relevant facts can be relatively straightforward if you follow some basic guidelines. We will be discussing these 7 basic guidelines in the next slides. These guidelines come from the League of Minnesota Cities article, Taking the Mystery Out of Finding Facts. Number 1, look up the code. Before setting out to find facts, a little investigation is needed. A crucial early step is to identify the relevant legal standards. For example, applications for conditional use permits are subject to standards that should be spelled out in the county ordinance. Determine exactly what ordinance standards apply. Reference and quote the relevant standards in your narrative. If quoting the code does not add to your explanation, then a simple reference is preferred. If your project required a pre-application conference, the report that the county provided at the end of that review should include relevant code sections that apply to your project. Number 2, apply facts to the code. Relevant facts should explain to the reader how and why the applicant is meeting the code. The document should identify the relevant legal criteria, such as statutory standards or code provisions, explain the relevant facts relating to the particular application, apply those facts to the legal criteria. And number 3, provide relevant facts. The narrative should state all the relevant facts the county will consider in making its decision. A fact is relevant if it proves or disproves that the application meets the legal standards. For instance, if an applicant is seeking a conditional use permit where the effect of traffic on an adjacent properties is an applicable standard, then the narrative should provide facts related to traffic impacts. It is important to address each and every relevant legal standard by describing relevant facts.
Number 4, show your work. Like a math exam in school, it is important to be complete and to show your work. Showing your work can be more important than reaching a particular result. Explaining the method of reasoning you use to demonstrate compliance with the applicable code ensures that you are on the right track. If your reader can tell how you reached your result without having to guess, you showed your work. But if the reader is left guessing, then you may be on shaky ground. Number 5, because. A simple technique to ensure your explanation sufficiently connects to the legal standards is to use the word because. Read each statement carefully before completing the narrative. What you write after the word because in each section must support the statement that introduces the applicable requirements. A similar approach is to phrase the standard as a question and then provide a detailed answer. Number 6, don't assume. Don't assume the reader knows about your project or has any background with the project. Present a complete picture by telling the whole story. The narrative should be clear to someone unfamiliar with the matter. A person who knows nothing about the project or the subject property should be able to read the narrative and understand what the project is, what approval criteria apply or don't apply to the project, and how they are met.
Number 7, stay on track. Sometimes issues arise that don't relate to the legal standards. If the narrative starts to discuss and debate the facts of the application without limiting the discussion to the relevant legal standards, it can waste a lot of time and energy on issues that don't lead to a demonstration of compliance with the applicable approval criteria. Arguments about irrelevant facts will lead the project astray. On the next couple of slides, we will go over some examples of what not to do. For lacking and missing information, some narratives are submitted with incomplete items, such as not referencing applicable code sections for the proposal, stating something meets the code but does not address the how, submitting a story for review with an opinion on why it should be approved, in regards to lacking explanation, in these examples, the narrative does not explain why something is met or is not applicable or includes opinions. The red text is an explanation of the problem with these examples. Simply stating that the code is met or not applicable does not address the how in Table 451050-1.6a for the narrative requirements on how the application meets or exceeds each of the applicable approval criteria and standards. By not including an explanation as to how the relevant code is met or why the applicant is assuming the code is not applicable means that staff will require revisions, which will result in extended review timelines. In many instances, the narrative is only a guide, and the factual information demonstrating compliance is in the supporting documentation, either the preliminary plan set or one of the many technical reports the applicant has provided. The narrative needs to provide a summary and then reference those additional documents in order to address the how requirement for the narrative. See the portion on the screen in red. This is what is missing from these examples. As you can see in the first bullet point, for example, the applicant states that the stormwater facility meets specific requirements, but does not tell us how they meet the criteria. Another example, in the last bullet point, we have an excerpt from a narrative simply stating that they need a variance, but not addressing how they meet any of the applicable approval criteria for a variance. On the next couple of slides, we will discuss the different review groups at the county and what sections of code they review your project against. Each reviewer at the county covers a different portion of the development code under Title 40. For instance, planning review code sections related to zoning, landscaping, parking, and many other for compliance with the land use code. Development engineering review the transportation, stormwater, and a portion of the environmental constraints that require engineering analysis that may be on the site.
Additional review groups assigned to your project may include the Wetland and Habitat Group, which reviews the rest of the environmental constraints with their code section being located in Title 40 under 40.445. Transportation concurrency can be located in Title 40 under 4350. They review your off-site transportation impacts. With the fire marshal reviewing the project for fire safety within Title 15. The building program utilizes Title 14 for building code, and public health is located within Title 24. Providing a cover sheet and index or table of contents so that the different review groups can quickly locate the sections of the narrative that they need to check ensures a more efficient review of your submittal. On the next slide, we have an example table of contents. In this example of table of contents, the applicant uses their own organizational structure for their narrative and references code sections by number and title. As you can see, the applicant has placed each key area of code and addresses it with the corresponding code section. For example, they have under number 5, Clark County Code Title 40, then under section 5.3, they break down into each applicable code criteria section. Showing section 5.3.1 will cover the signage code and citing it as 40.310. On the next slide, we have an example of incorporating the applicable approval criteria and addressing how the approval criteria is met in a narrative. As previously mentioned in other slides, each item of the applicable code section must be addressed. In this example narrative, the applicant has even broken down the required zoning tables, including setbacks, density, and lot requirements, into their table, showing the requirements and compliance with those requirements. These extra steps save a significant amount of time by eliminating the need to flip back and forth between multiple sheets in a plan set, narratives, and reports by third-party consultants, ultimately reducing your overall review timeline. We have discussed in detail our expectations of your narrative. Now we're going to briefly touch on how you submit your application, including your narrative. Clark County has gone to all digital submittals, and paper copies are no longer accepted. We accept a wide range of file types, whether you write your narrative in Microsoft Word and convert it to a PDF, or you scan in a handwritten narrative. We allow many file types if they are legible and clear. The county has a great learning lab video from July 2025, which addresses all these items, as well as the submittal process and naming conventions. If you find that you've written your narrative and have questions about applicable sections, please email us at our general line at landuse@clark.wa.gov. We have a rotating planner of the day and do our best to respond within 24 hours.
All right, summary. The staff review your project as a whole, including any additional information or any additional features or services you offer as part of your project. Note that it's the applicant has the burden of proof to demonstrate that their project meets or exceeds the applicable approval criteria. Your narrative is the guide to how you meet these. If changes occur with the proposal or revisions are requested, this will add time to the review process. Your narrative and plans must be consistent. Your narrative can reference things in the plans. For example, see plan sheet C1.1. If you disagree with the applicability of a certain code section, you must explain why it is not applicable. Do not just say NA or not applicable. The narrative and the pre-app are similar in that you get out of it what you put into it. Be detailed. It is always better to explain more than not enough. If you state something in your narrative or plan, it will be required as a finding or condition. For example, some code sections, such as 40.320 in the landscaping code, allow for alternate methods of meeting code. If you identify a specific method of meeting code or include additional items not required by code outright, these can become conditions of approval. These additional items are sometimes used to justify a departure from code or to justify a position on how the proposal meets the specific code. And our final thoughts. We know the code is complicated and we know things might get missed. That is why the review process includes opportunities for staff to provide you with feedback. Responding to that feedback in a timely manner is crucial to keep your project moving forward. As our hearings examiner stated at the beginning of our hearings, this isn't a popularity contest. Whether everyone loves it or everyone hates it isn't something we get to consider. The only issue we get to consider is whether the application does or does not comply with the applicable code criteria. Thank you for your time.
All right, it's now time for our Q&A portion. If you have a question for one of our presenters, please use the mic in front of you. You'll press the button where the light will turn green. When you're done asking your question, please press the button again.
It was said that there were opportunities to correct or revise information. When are those opportunities?
In a type 1 case, you will have a fully complete decision that is sent out or a not fully complete at 21 days into the review timeline. In a type 2 and 3, you actually have an additional step of early issues where you can address those items and revise at that point because they're a little more complex.
Thank you.
You mentioned legal standard and legal criteria. What is that?
The legal standard or the legal criteria is basically the code like Title 40 that we reference all of our decisions off of. That engineering, land use, wet hab, everyone kind of references as Title 40. We just call it a few different things.
How would someone show the how referenced in slide 20?
So the how, the applicant would just need to show compliance with the code. If you stated that you had 20 minimum parking spaces and on the narrative or plan you show that you meet 21, then you have met that how.
How is phasing approved?
Sorry, what was that? I couldn't hear you. Sorry.
How is phasing approved?
Oh, phasing? Yeah, we actually look at each phasing plan in individual bubbles, basically. So phase 1 is approved in its own against every code criteria. So it's standalone. And then phase 2 would also have to meet that same compliance individually so that each phase would stand on its own in case something happens and one phase is never completed, then the project would still comply and conform with the applicable code criteria.
There are other code sections that do look at the project as a whole and ignore the phasing as well, such as transportation concurrency. They look at the whole project to see how the whole project will affect the county roads.
And then also, they can, if they're approved for 5 phases, can they start on phase 5 or phase 2? Does it have to go 1 through 5?
It depends on the project. Sometimes phase 5 is dependent on phase 1. So if that happens, then phase 1 would have to go first or concurrently with phase 5. But if they're not dependent on each other, then they can be processed individually during final engineering.
Last one more.
Oh, we have another one?
Can you hear me okay? If something is stated in a narrative, can we revise it?
Yeah, so you can revise, like yes and no. You can revise it up to a certain point. The further it gets in progression in the review process, the harder it's going to be to revise it. So if we're coming down to the deadline of the staff report and things being issued and you want to revise something significant, then it's unlikely or we may require a hold to backfill everything and kind of figure out what we need to do, because some areas may influence other areas and bleed out a little bit. So it's kind of a yes and no answer.
All right. Thank you so much for attending today's session, and thank you to our presenters. Our next session is going to be Code Enforcement 101, presented by Code Enforcement Officers Scott Melville and Sydney Valere, and that is scheduled for the third Thursday of next month on September 18th at 11 a.m., and we hope to see you there.